start a special city council work session for today, Tuesday, November 24th. We're here to learn about and talk about Metro garbage programs, the tipping fees and potential construction projects and whatever else that might come up. Joe?
So, Mr. Mayor, since I know there's many people on the call that maybe we can do quick introductions just so everyone knows who everyone is, if you don't mind, just quickly.
Yeah, that'd be great. So go through City Council. Again, I'm Keith Mays, Mayor of Sherwood.
Tim Rosner, Council President, Sherwood.
Kim Young, City Council.
Renee Browse, City Council.
Sean Garland, City Council.
Russell Griffin, City Council.
City Council.
Okay, that's all the city councilors. I'm Joe Gall, I'm the city manager. Most of the senior leadership probably won't be participating in this call, but many of my department heads are on the call, including Sylvia Murphy, our city recorder, and Josh Soper, our city attorney, who may chime in at some point. So, Marissa, if I can put you on the spot to maybe start with everyone from the Metro.
Of course. Thank you, Joe. Councilors, my name is Marisa Madrigal. I'm Metro's Chief Operating Officer. Before I hand it off to the rest of the team, I'd like to introduce Craig Dirksen, our counselor, Metro Councilor Craig Dirksen. I believe I saw him join the call.
Good evening. Yes, I am here.
Hey, Craig.
Thank you, Councilor.
Hey, Craig.
And so we have a couple presentations for you today. I'm not sure, I think we're taking them one at a time, starting with the rates. I'm joined here today by our Chief Financial Officer, Brian Kennedy, and our Director of our department, Roy Brauer. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak face to face. I wish we were all in the same room and could be physically together, but I really appreciate all the great questions that you've been asking about the initial rate proposal. I want to say right up front with full transparency that based on feedback that we've heard from you and other members of the community, both on the public and the private side, we are preparing an alternative option for our council to consider. We've heard a pretty consensus feedback that two rate increases within 1 year is a hardship for many reasons. And so we are crunching the numbers and seeing if we can figure out how to get it down to one increase a little bit closer to July of 2020 to give everyone some relief and just some time to implement. I know that doesn't answer all the questions, very legitimate questions that you have about how we compose our rates and what goes into that and what it can pay for and what it can't. And that's part of what Brian's going to be talking about. But I just wanted to say up front that we appreciate the feedback and we are taking it to heart and we are looking at the options that we're giving our council. Councilor Dirksen, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add before we launch into the presentation.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with Sherwood Council to address the concerns they've expressed. But I look forward to seeing the presentation as well and hearing the reaction to that.
Thank you.
And yes, so thanks for so many of Metro staff, and I'll let you for being willing to meet with us in the middle of the heightened pandemic. And because as I stated kind of in a note to Roy and maybe to Craig, for me, the first foundational function of Metro's existence is to run help coordinate an efficient garbage system in the region, and from what I've seen, and I heard it 6 months ago before the COVID hit, and then we all got distracted because we had to focus on COVID. But I certainly we have expressed concerns, and I'm glad you're can at least potentially delay the next rate increase, and look forward to hearing more details about your modeling and for rates and other details on potential construction projects.
Thank you, Mayor.
Marissa, this is Tim Rosner. I just wanted you to be aware that Garrett Rosenthal just joined the call as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, so our counselor-elect, Garrett Rosenthal, is here with us tonight as well. We will miss Counselor Dirksen, and we are looking forward to working with Counselor-elect Rosenthal.
My apologies for being late. It took longer to download the software for Meet than I thought. Can you see me and hear me? That's what I.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. Good job.
All right.
For joining us.
All right. We're good.
Okay, if we're ready, I'm happy to turn it over to Roy Brauer and Brian Kennedy for the presentation on our rate proposal.
Hi, good evening. I'm Roy Brauer. I'm the Director of Waste Prevention and Environmental Services at Metro, and I thank you for devoting some of this time to getting into a couple of issues. We have this split between two issues. We were going to talk about the rate situation at Metro first, and then handle any questions or comments or discussion. And then we'll talk about our plan to recommend to our council to purchase some property in Cornelius for a future public solid waste facility, and we'll get into those details. I guess to lead off, you probably haven't heard much about Metro rates over the Okay, did everybody hear that?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Okay, I don't think that was me.
Roy, I don't think it was you. I think for some reason Garrett was admitted a second time, and I don't know why, and I probably should have ignored that, and I admitted him, and then it started making that noise, so.
Oh, okay. Well, moving on, just a little background on rates. You probably haven't heard a lot about Metro rates because they've been very stable over the last 15 years. Partially that's a result of regional tonnage coming in higher each year because of a fairly booming economy, especially since the Great Recession, and people moving into the region, and that just has a tendency to generate more waste. In the last 15 years, we've actually reduced the rate 3 times. The last time was in 2016-17 to 2017-18, we reduced it. So Brian Kennedy, who is our Chief Financial Officer, is going to, I believe, share his screen and give you a short presentation to give you a little more context on the rates, and then we'll take questions and discussions at the end of that. So, Brian.
Thanks, Roy. And thank you all for having us here today. Happy to have the chance to talk with you about our solid waste rate setting process. Before I jump in, I think the first thing I want to point out is one function we have at Metro is we separate the operation of the solid waste rate system, or solid waste system, from the rate setting process. So the calculation of rates happens in my shop in finance and regulatory services, and then the execution of the solid waste program happens in Roy's department. So I'm going to share my slides. All right. So little bit of background. Normally, we do go through our rate setting process in the spring, so in March and April, around that time, with changes that are effective on July 1st. That didn't happen last fiscal year because of COVID-19. So we were seeing significant changes in tonnage, a really rapid decline, and so we deferred any changes to our fee structure. However, the Metro excise tax, that adjusts automatically. The formula is set in the Metro code, and so that rate did change on July 1st. So just an example of what was happening in the spring. I mean, obviously, the economy was in a tailspin, but there were some pretty distinct changes in tonnage at both metro facilities and regional facilities at the same time. You can see the blue line on the chart shows our actuals, 17, 18, 18, 19, and then the three lines on the right, the orange, gray, and the yellow, show our forecasts at different points in time. So in November of 2019, that's when we do our solid waste forecast that we usually use to set our solid waste rates for the following year. You can see that we were projecting tonnage to be up over fiscal year 18-19. We obviously didn't have the 19-20 actuals at the time we did that forecast. So that was kind of our starting point. Then the gray line is the April 20 forecast, significantly below the November forecast, significantly below the prior fiscal year forecast. And then you see in July, that was even lower. So we see tonnage going down, and we decided to hold off on changing our fees because there was so much uncertainty. We wanted to wait and see how tonnage stabilized before we went through that process. So what we also did during that time is we took a number of actions with our budget. So first, we deferred a number of planned new capital investments, things like starting design work on the proposed west and south facilities or potential west and south facilities, a potential redesign of our Metro Paint facility, and a number of other smaller capital projects. And we also deferred any associated debt financing that we might have used to fund those activities. In April, the Metro Council reduced the fiscal 2021 budget for the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department by $11 million. Most of that decrease was due to that deferring or canceling of capital projects. We also implemented mandatory staff furloughs through December of 2020. So that was primarily in our represented staff, though some of our management staff have furloughed as well.
And to be clear, so your furlough, is that just like the school, a lot of schools did the Friday furloughs?
Staff had a number of options for how to implement it. I think the important thing is our non-represented staff, our management for this fiscal year have had a pay freeze implemented. Our largest labor union did have a cost of living increase negotiated, but the furlough offset the cost of that cost of living increase. So essentially, all of our workers have had a pay freeze in the current fiscal year. So workers had a number of options for how they structured that furlough, but we negotiated with the union to achieve a certain level of cost savings.
Just a quick
Brian, excuse me, Brian, wouldn't it be appropriate to talk about reductions in staffing as well? You may be leaving people with the understanding or a misunderstanding about that.
Councillor Dirksen, that's a good point. We didn't have any significant staff reductions in the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services budget. We had obviously kind of massive layoffs in our visitor venues, more than 700 staff, about approximately 40% of our workforce. We've also gone through a series of budget reductions in our general fund. In total, we have reduced, close to 20% in our general fund, with a significant number of layoffs affecting those departments as well.
So this is Council President Rosner. Just a couple of quick questions on that. In your the 11 million in reductions that you quote on this slide, is that reflected in the your adopted fiscal 2021 budget?
Yes.
So a question on that, because I do see that you have a reduction in staff, I think of 3 or 4 headcount. But I think the thing that surprised me is your personnel costs actually went up from 20 million to 22 million, even though you had a reduction, and your average weighted cost per employee has gone up like 13%. So I was trying to understand what's driving that in your overall cost structures.
That's a good question. We'd need to dig into that a little more detail to answer that question specifically. I mean, we did have increases in, obviously the furloughs were not reflected in the budget. So the budget does reflect that cost of living increase that represented employees received. We also had increases in our pension rates through PERS, increases for our health and benefits costs.
I believe the adopted budget also didn't include the non-represented pay freeze.
That is an excellent point. Thank you, Marisa. We made that change really too late to pull that back out. So our actual spending will be lower than what was in the adopted budget.
And then just one last quick question. I'll let you go on. I apologize. In the adopted budget, you have 13.7 million in capital expense. You mentioned that you had postponed, reduced, I can't remember which, some of the capital projects you had planned. Is that reflected in that 13 million? Because for the previous year, you only had 7 million. So that's quite an increase year over year in capital expense.
Well, capital projects, by their nature tend to be one time. So in that 13 million, the most significant project is we budgeted $7.5 million for land acquisition. That's, obviously a one-time expense. We also budgeted $3.5 million for an investment in our food waste processing at Metro Central. So between the two of those, that's $11 million of our capital program. Typically, our capital program in the solid waste fund tends to be kind of relatively minor facility upgrades, equipment replacement. So those projects do stand out, but they were included in our 5-year capital improvement plan.
Okay, I get it. So the 11 million is reflective of the 2 projects that you just mentioned.
Well, no, so the 11 million, there was additional capital spending in our proposed budget beyond that 13 million, and we reduced it down to 13 million. The 2 biggest components of that being land acquisition and the Metro Central organics processing improvements.
All right, thank you.
So going through our mid-year rate setting process, we use Metro's rate setting criteria and principles that the council adopts every year as part of the rates. Now, the major factors driving the rates as we went through this process. So first, we use the revenue requirements in the adopted budget. So the Metro Charter does not allow us to set rates or fees at higher than the cost of service. So we have to start with those revenue requirements in the budget. The second biggest thing we use is a solid waste tonnage forecast. We have to make a projection on how much waste will move through Metro facilities in order to accurately project our costs. This year, the rates also include investments in green fuel at Metro transfer stations, improved wages for workers, contracted workers at Metro transfer stations, less polluting equipment, and then additional staff to improve safety at Metro South. That last piece is really important. As you look at with the pandemic, we've seen an increase of over 10% in customers at our Metro facilities, and those are primarily self-haul customers, some of our most expensive customers to serve. And then we also have overall impacts that affect service costs. So we have cost inflators in our contracts to operate the transfer stations. One last thing to note on kind of the major factors. So in the solid waste budget, over half of that budget goes to transfer station operations and payments to contractors. So that is the transfer station operations, that's the trucking contract. So a significant portion of the revenue we collect is paid out outside Metro. We
And
also set our
chime in
rates.
here, an important point about the costs that go into contracts is that to reduce any costs that flow to contracts have to be renegotiated. And so in a short term, that crisis like we have here with COVID, we really have to focus our cuts and our restrictions on the costs that we and only we control.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. We also set our rates so that we can adequately fund our required reserves. So we have a couple legally required reserves for landfill closure and pollution remediation. We also set aside money for capital investments. And then we also have an operating reserve where our target is to maintain 45 days worth of operating expenses. And then we have a rate stabilization reserve that we use to manage our rates as well.
Hey, Brian, one quick question about your reserve. Is that 45-day reserve? That's assuming you have zero revenue coming in. So if you have a third of or half the revenue coming in, that would be 90 days, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay, just trying to understand how to interpret that number.
So our staff recommendation going into this process, and obviously, as Marisa mentioned, we are developing options, additional options beyond our initial staff recommendation. So the first thing was we're proposing to reduce the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services operating and capital budget by an additional $4 million this fiscal year. We're also proposing to use up to 50% of the rate stabilization reserve, or about $7.5 million, to mitigate solid waste fee increases. Then we're proposing to increase transaction fees, the tonnage fee at Metro facilities, and the regional system fee to cover Metro's now reduced costs. We are not proposing to change other materials fees at this time. So specifically, the tonnage fee at Metro stations, so this is at Metro Central and Metro South, based on our current cost of service, the rate would increase $6.64 up to a total of $71.05. The regional system fee would increase from $18.58 to $21.23. There would be no change in the excise tax because, as I mentioned before, that formula is set in the Metro Code and adjusts annually. And then there's no change to the DEQ fee or the enhancement fee. We'd also propose increasing the transaction fees, so our automated scale from $2 to $2.50, and then our scale house transaction fee from $10 to $13. The cumulative effect of the change in the tonnage charge and the transaction fee would take our minimum charge at Metro facilities from $28 to $33.
Hey, Brian, I apologize.
Yes.
Another question. Back on the excise tax, the previous slide. So
yes.
That's set on Metro ordinance, but council does have the ability to adjust, delay, reduce that fee if they were to so choose, correct?
By ordinance, they could change that.
Okay.
So we're not proposing any changes to our other materials charges at Metro facilities. So what this means, this would maintain our current operations at both Metro Central and Metro South, so open hours, open days. It would reduce some regional programs and services. These would be programs and services funded by the regional system fee. So, for example, there would be some reduced hours for the Recycling Information Center. Right now, I believe they're open 6 days a week. They would go down to 5 days a week. We'd see some cutbacks in education programs and other things. This would fully fund our solid waste operating reserve. This is really important. When we were experiencing that rapid tonnage decline as the pandemic really took hold, between the end of February and June 30th, we burned through about $2 million of that operating reserve because of that tonnage loss. So that is the reason we prioritize fully funding that operating reserve. And then I should also note that this budget and rate proposal would deplete 50% of Metro's rate stabilization reserve.
But it's safe to say, in a 1 in 100 year pandemic, eating into reserves is a reasonable thing.
This is why we have reserve.
Yes, and I would add that we don't know how long this will continue. You know, we have a tonnage forecast from with data through the end of October that suggested that things were turning around, tonnage was stabilizing, maybe even increasing, but that forecast did not anticipate the freeze that was imposed by the governor last week or 2 weeks ago. So, you know, we know a lot. We know more than we did in March, but we don't know how long this will continue. And so our recommendation is not to fully deplete our reserves because we don't know what next year holds.
So what were your assumptions in terms of how long this will last? I mean, you had to have some assumption in there.
We didn't forecast a specific, end of the pandemic. So we have an in-house analytics shop. So they looked at tonnage trends and made a forecast for economic activity. So right now they're projecting that things will slowly get better, and by early 2022, that they think the solid waste system will be kind of back to where we were pre-pandemic. But again, that's just their forecast.
Yep, Brian, it's probably worth noting that we have gone from doing an annual forecast to doing a quarterly forecast, simply because of the unknowns and uncertainties out there. We're trying to get a handle on what's really happening. The other thing that we've done is we've required weekly reporting from all the facilities that process or transfer waste. And so we're able to get a real-time look on a weekly basis at how much garbage is going through the system.
Thanks, Roy.
Good.
So this slide is from last fiscal year. It does not incorporate the proposed rate increase, but I think it's a good example to show that, and this is for City of Portland customers, the Metro rate is a relatively modest portion of the overall customer's bill. Collection and actual disposal of garbage makes up a much more significant cost of their bill than the Metro fees.
But you're 20% of the bill, and that's no small amount. And so every part of the bill or component that goes into the household homeowner charge is important to be critical to ensure that it's well managed. Because if you do a 10% essentially increase, your Metro portion on the Portland example here goes to $6.65 approximately. That's a significant increase.
And I would really like to see an analysis for the commercial, for our restaurants, et cetera, and what their bills will look like, because they push a lot more pounds of material than a regular household does.
Absolutely, we understand. And that's part of the reason we put our rates through a fairly rigorous analysis every year to make sure that we are covering the cost of the service.
One other thing I would point out, Brian, if I could, just as a reminder for the City Council, the only thing on the Metro rate that really follows through is the regional system fee for purposes of Sherwood, since you have a transfer station located in your vicinity that sets its own rates. Metro does not set transfer station rates, so most of the disposal cost and the yard debris and composting costs are already borne through the Pride recycling facility. The only real impact that Metro's rate would have would be the regional system fee. So that $2, I forget, $2.29 or whatever is the thing that would follow through, that would be required to be collected by the all the transfer stations.
That's a good point based on the rates you're proposing. I think where at least I'm coming from, and I think the mayor might be, is given the situation and the pandemic and the potential impact on our residential and commercial users of these services, we should be looking at all those Metro fees that get attached to this, not just the, are there opportunities to reduce in other areas to offset this and minimize the impact to our consumers out there? That's kind of why we're asking about all the fees, not just the regional service fee.
Okay. So in terms of future implications, one of the things I want to note is that growing the rate stabilization reserve over the last decade has been really critical. So kind of a quick analysis that if we didn't use the rate stabilization reserve, we estimate that our 2021 fees on the tonnage charge would be about $13 a ton higher, and the regional system fee would be $4 a ton higher, but for the use of that regional system fee. And I've got some more data on this in a second. But so Metro rates have been very stable over the last decade. As Roy mentioned, rising regional tonnage is one of the driving factors in that period of rate stability. The last significant rate increases were during the Great Recession. And this rapid change in tonnage due to COVID is really unprecedented. So this shows a history of Metro rates. So on the far right, 2021, that includes the proposed rate increase. So you can see that from really 2012, 13 through 1920, rates have been very, very stable. And even twice during that period, rates declined. But you can see there was, a fairly significant increase from 2008-9 up through 2011-12. In fact, there were 3 years there where Metro had 3 years with over 6% rate increases each year. Again, that was a result of the tonnage impact from the Great Recession. This shows the tonnage history. So you can see from the prior high in 2008, tonnage dropped fairly considerably through 2011. And you can see that the Metro tip fee, which is the gray line, increased. It's a little bit of a lagging indicator. So as that tonnage fell, the rate increased. But then starting in 2013, 2014, as the regional economy picked back up again, that rate really stabilized. So what we're seeing now really isn't unprecedented. When tonnage declines, Metro's rate is pushed higher. That's primarily a function of the fixed costs we have for our transfer station operations and regional programs.
So Brian, the tonnage decline, COVID, you were proposing rate increases before COVID ever hit.
Right, we were going to have rate increases. Based on increases in the budget.
Right. So there's other costs that have gone up somewhere so COVID, I don't believe, is much into the conversation since you were proposing to do a big rate increase before it ever happened. So more on that later, I imagine.
Well, I guess the thing I would point out there is, yes, there are some costs that increased costs that are driving the rate. Like I noted earlier, our increase in contract costs at Metro South, increased Metro staffing at Metro South. Those have been significant drivers of cost increase. And there were other, frankly, program expansions that were being contemplated pre-COVID. With the COVID recession, we have cut back on a lot of that, made significant budget reductions. And so the rate increase, the need for the rate increase you're seeing now is being driven partly by those increased costs, but then also partly by the decline in tonnage as well.
And so then when you have programs that don't happen or there's a decrease in programs, does that mean it's just a generic expense of advertising type stuff, or does that mean it's a internal labor issue? It didn't sound like you've reduced any significant labor within this department.
We have not made significant labor reductions yet, and the reason for that is, most of our labor is tied to things like our scale house operations, which are busier than ever, our household hazardous waste facilities that are busier than ever, our RID patrol, which is busy, staff supporting the transfer station operations. Again, more than half of our budget is tied to those transfer station operations. We have a smaller staff footprint in our regional programs and services, and many of those are still continuing. We still have staff supporting those investments, supporting those partnerships with local governments, where we send millions of dollars a year out to the region to help run these programs, and that work is still continuing.
And if I could offer to Brian, back in the end of 2019, first part of 2020, as I had mentioned, the regional waste plan was adopted, which was fairly aspirational and had envisioned a number of pretty aggressive programs. We had originally proposed for this current year a fairly significant expansion in both FTE and contracted professional service costs to launch some of those programs in concert with local governments and other community partners. That was completely abandoned. In addition to the 11 million and now the 4 million, I think that was about as I recall, Brian, about a 23 or $4 million proposal that was completely abandoned as we went deeper into the COVID crisis. So a lot of the rate increases we were discussing back in January had to do with that considerable program expansion, not where we're at today, where we're just trying to retain basic level of services.
Yeah, I know I made this pitch back in the Monday Q&A call that you guys did, which I appreciate you guys doing that call, by the way. Thank you very much. But I'll make it again. And I really think we need to go back to a regional rate review committee that's made up of representation from the cities and the haulers, because if I could just be very candid for a second, we're at kind of the end of the mile on that. We're the ones that have to communicate the rate increases to our customers. We're the ones that have to work with our haulers on that. Frankly, we're the ones that get the brunt of it from our consumers and customers in our community. So I think I would really encourage us to think about maybe how do we do this in the future, and how do we coordinate on these rate reviews. And since all these programs that you talked about that Metro's looking at, I think that needs to be part of that equation, because they ultimately have an impact on our consumers' rates. And I think we need to make sure we're represented at the city level on that.
Thank you.
Okay. If you want to say yes now, that'd be great, but I know that's not going to happen.
No, I mean, I appreciate that comment, and we do work very closely with local government solid waste directors, and I know as part of the Washington.
But that's big cities.
We have a number of smaller towns, Gresham, Hillsborough.
Hillsborough is small.
Well, it's all relative.
Those are the after Portland, they're the second, third, fourth largest cities in the metro area. So, not to be kind of snippy, but just working with them isn't. We don't think that could be better. You could do better.
Sure, and we're certainly open to inviting broader participation by local governments in our. We meet monthly. Whether you want to devote someone to that, we'd be happy to invite them in. Certainly.
Awesome. I heard an invitation right there. That's
take you up on that. That's a great first step.
So I just have one more slide. So in looking to the future, so we are anticipating a need for a rate adjustment again on July 1st. At that point, we would propose to stay on the July rate increase schedule. So as Marisa mentioned, we're obviously going to be bringing some additional options to the Metro Council next month for them to consider. But I think, one lesson we have learned here is that we definitely need to stay on that July schedule. And, hopefully we don't have another, once in a century pandemic, surprise us next year as well. We were also proposing to review miscellaneous fees in March. So things like our household hazardous waste fee, what we charge out of region waste, cleanup waste, freon containing items, tires. And these are fees that apply at Metro transfer stations and are really based just on the cost of service and our cost for processing those specific materials. We were anticipating a smaller rate increase in July, but there's still significant uncertainty. One of the things, obviously that drives this is what happens with regional tonnage. So, we were feeling fairly good about our forecast 2.5 weeks ago. We don't know what impact the current freeze will have on tonnage with the will the closure of indoor dining in the region dramatically change things? We just don't know. We'll know more in a few weeks. But again, so there's just a lot of uncertainty in how we plan our budget out over the next 18 months.
One quick question about that. You mentioned that this proposed increase would fully fund your reserves. I think the word you used. Is there, over what time frame would this increase build that reserve back up? Is that what you mean when you say would fully fund it?
This increase would fully fund our operating reserve. So that 45-day reserve, which
so we'd just keep it at 45 days is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
We would be still utilizing over 50% or up to 50% of our rate stabilization reserve. And we are not proposing, the rate increase does not contemplate starting to rebuild that.
Okay.
That's something that we will take on in future years when the economy is recovering. That was all I had. I'm happy to answer any other questions or move on if that's your desire.
So I've heard. What is your back of the napkin? Do you have 5-year projections?
Or in terms of the rate?
Yeah, and programs and operations and yeah.
That's a good question. We had some estimate. An estimate I felt better about, 6 months ago, pre-pandemic. So we're in the process right now of updating our 5-year forecast and trying to look at what the COVID recovery looks like and how that affects solid waste services and our budget. Again, like I mentioned, the forecast we had from 2.5 weeks ago, we were feeling pretty good about and feeling like recovery was, at least in the solid waste side, was kind of around the corner. And that would definitely have a moderating impact on future rate increases, all other things being equal. And we don't know how realistic that is right now.
Is there a projection on additional programs, elements, anything that impacts my community's expenses that get passed on to us? So fill in the blank program needs $5 million to execute to educate somebody about something. How is that passed on? How is that paid for by ratepayers and households and businesses in my community?
So that's I think there are a couple different things to think about. So in terms of our regional programs and services, if they benefit the entire region, not just users of the metro facilities, those are funded in the regional system fee. So that though any expansions in programs, new programs would go through our budget process, be proposed by Roy's department, and would go through Marisa and then to the Metro Council. So that process is relatively pretty standard. Potential capital investments also have a potential future impact on the regional system fee, but I think the significant capital investments are several years out, so I wouldn't expect to see immediate rate impacts from those.
And Mayor, if I may, just speak to sort of my philosophy as the person recommending the budget to the Metro Council. We have at Metro just experienced an incredibly difficult year. Massive layoffs in different areas, and for better or worse, we most of our money is restricted, so we can't move it from one place to another. So as we dig out across the organization, we plan to be extremely cautious because of the uncertainty that Brian talked about, because we take our responsibility as the stewards of the public dollar very seriously and understand the impact that it has on your community, on our communities, across the region. And so, in the conversations that I've had with Roy and Brian, as we pull together these budget cuts, when I first arrived at Metro, as they were describing, we scaled, completely abandoned whole programs that were slated to be funded because of the crisis, and have just kind of continued to hack away at WPEZ's budget and other budgets across the organization. So I think we're in no rush to rapidly re-expand. We think that that's going to be quite difficult, and we are very conscious of the impact of our decisions on the community and on taxpayers. So really, I just wanted to acknowledge your concern and let you know that we share that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the strength of government monopolies should be rate stability and strength and long-term thinking, big picture planning. So I know we do that with water, sewer, storm, and other investments in our community, how we build our parks, how we build our streets, how we maintain our infrastructure, taking the very long-term view and have that same expectations of Metro with garbage.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add, Marisa, that I'm really pleased to hear how close a look you took at stopping programs that you had in the works because of what's happening with the pandemic and fine-tuning the ones that you have in place. But kind of just adding on to Keith's comment, I think, also taking a hard look at programs that you have currently running that maybe we don't need anymore because there's other mechanisms to get those services done. And I'm just throwing this out there, but one example is paint. Through the Oregon, what do they call it? There's a statewide paint program where you get charged a fee on every can of paint you buy, and that goes into a fund that's used. And there's a company called, what are they called? Paint Care, that has 178 recycling locations in the state of Oregon within 15 minutes of 98% of the population. That does a great job. And I'm just throwing it out there as an example of, has the Metro Paint Program, it used to fill a great need. Do we still need it? Is there a better way that we can providing that service to the community and maybe save some money? So,
well, and that's a great example. We actually take all the paint that comes in through the Paint Care program at our recycling facility. We're the only recycling facility that literally takes it, opens it, and mixes it and blends the colors. And part of our challenge has been there's such a demand for paint because of the COVID crisis. People are at home and they're remodeling and sprucing up their houses, and we have not been able to keep up with the demand on the paint, but we have a very close relationship with the paint care program. And I'll give you one other example, because I know we came to your city council, gosh, probably 18 months ago on the food scraps recycling program that was supposed to have started in March of 2020. We've now put it off until March of 2021, and I just got a recommendation from local governments and Metro staff that we're going to suggest putting it off until 2022. And that really has to do with when are restaurants and schools and other, food producing institutions going to be back up and running, and we don't want to necessarily be the first entity that puts a new requirement on collecting that food, even though it has an energy content that we want to try to capture, and we want to try to get it out of the regular waste stream. So we're going through a lot of our programs looking at that and what's the right timing. And I'll give you another example. Household hazardous waste collection events, which I know we've done in Sherwood and your area. We have ceased doing those just because we haven't been able to find a COVID-friendly way to sponsor those kinds of events out in the communities. We've kept our 2 permanent facilities in Oregon City and in Portland open, but people have to drive quite a distance to get their household hazardous waste to one of these facilities. So we'll be looking at a number of these individual programs to see what the best future can be and what's the most cost-efficient way to relaunch those in some cases, or continue them on in some other cases.
Or maybe not launch them.
Or maybe not.
Just putting that out there. Yeah. Joe, I think
with Tim's example of paint, so if that's the relationship, is it a cash neutral operation then, or profit center?
Nearly so. I believe what Brian is probably, we recover about 80 to 90% of the cost through the sales of paint. So that's one of the things we're going to look at too, is increasing the cost of a gallon of paint. Because if you go to Home Depot, you know what it costs to buy a gallon of paint.
Yeah, I think I saw you're selling it for $15 a gallon. You could probably go up to 20 and still be a bargain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something we look at closely. We're also trying to make sure that we're paying the workers in our paint facility a fair and competitive wage. We've transitioned from using primarily temps to more regular Metro staff, but we do want to make sure that it is, as close to cost neutral as possible. And under the Metro Charter, it can't be a profit center. We are not allowed to have a profit and to make profit in the solid waste fund.
Great. So yes, being cash neutral is, I imagine, the goal, the hope. So
Joe, I think we had some slides we wanted to show on this. Is that correct?
Yeah. Quick check-in, Brian. I believe you had a time you had to leave. Can we do a quick check-in? You're okay?
No, I'm happy to stay here as long as you need me.
Okay, thank you. So yes, as I think I sent to a few of you, we had Chris Bell when we got your rate model, which thank you for providing to us. Take a look at that and your proposed budget, and he has some slides he put together, which I think is going to trigger some additional questions. So Chris, I think many of you know Chris Bell. He works with many jurisdictions, and I will turn it over to you. And I know you have a screen you want to share.
Yeah, let's see if we can get this. All right. So what I did here is there's 7 slides here, and I when the question started coming up a couple weeks ago, I took the Metro's budget, I pulled that down from your website, and summarized it here, utilized some of the solid waste tons from the rate model, and came to a couple conclusions here based on the information I have. Since fiscal year 2018 and up through 2021, Metro personnel costs have increased from 14 million to 22 million. But at the same time, the revenue has remained relatively flat. But that increase in revenue, as Roy has attributed to, is primarily due to additional tons over and above the tonnage forecast. So with the booming economy, especially since 2016, garbage has been very, very lucrative for Metro, and building up that fund balance and keeping it stable over the period. But you can see that Metro personnel, and I'm assuming that this is due to the reorganizational costs that took place between fiscal year 19 and 20. The other piece that really...
Hey, Chris?
Yes.
Can I stop you for a second? Can
Yes.
you switch your view so you can just, so the slide you're showing can be bigger? You're on a view that previews the next slide.
Okay.
Sorry.
Is that it? That work?
I don't think so.
Did not change it.
Hey, Chris, you were close. Just go back to where you were before and select the other option.
Yeah, let's see here from the beginning.
Sorry about that, folks.
No, it's okay.
Your mouse is not working, your internet's not working, or something.
We had this issue, I think, last time too, with something in the settings.
It's a default for Excel or for PowerPoint, which I hate personally, but
Chris, if you pick display settings like you did the other option, we'll swap them.
So if you do display settings,
Yep.
right
But
there.
I don't see your mouse moving on this screen.
Moving.
You're on a different screen.
Joe, do you want to pull it up on yours?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot now.
Yeah, I'll tell you when to move.
Why don't you get out of that, because we can't have two going. Looks like you froze. Oh,
Yeah, the sharing froze.
All right, let me go see if I can get this to work. Is that better? It's better on my screen.
Looks good, Joe.
Okay.
Better here.
All right. Thank you. So, Chris, you'll tell me when you want me to scroll to the next one.
Okay. So what I was saying is over the last 4 years, the Metro personnel costs have increased from 14 million to 22 million for the current fiscal year. And in addition to the increase in the personnel, the materials and service expenses also increased from 47 to 60 million. Part of that was due to the change in contractors from Republic Services to Recology, primarily at Metro South, as Brian was saying earlier, and the addition of additional services provided by Recology on sorting of dry waste materials. The other piece that I took here is the change from, or the change in FTEs from 122 to, as of this year, 173, which is item E. And the overall cost per FTE has remained relatively steady with the exception of this current year, where it's increased to 129,000 approximately per FTE, looking at the personnel budget. The increase, as Brian was explaining earlier, the projected tonnage has decreased by just a little under 9% for the current fiscal year, current projected fiscal year. And so what this is telling me is that, while tonnage has decreased, by 8%, costs have substantially increased in this case, from 72 million in fiscal 18 up to projected 104 million in the current fiscal year. Can you go to the next slide, Joe?
I can try.
Okay.
Hey, it worked.
Okay. And so again, this right here is also from the budget document.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
By the way, I'm not able to see any of the slides.
Yeah, I can't either.
Really?
I can't either.
Likewise.
Oh my goodness.
Huh. Joe, what'd you do? I could see them.
Well, why can some people see them and not everyone?
The differences between guests and, well, no, you're a guest too. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I can see them, and I'm a guest.
I have faith in Joe.
I'm looking at some of the settings. So I apologize. This has never happened on a Teams call that I've been involved with, where some people can see it and some people can't.
You may try to take another shot, Joe.
Yeah, why don't you do that? That just doesn't seem, because everyone saw yours.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave again. I really hate COVID.
Is someone not muted? It's really, there's a lot of static going on.
It's Kim Young. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, can you see that?
I'm still trying to get out of mine.
Oh, okay.
You went too fast, so.
I can see it. No, not anymore.
I can do it again here, Joe.
Yep, I'm out, so.
Okay, is that it?
Looks good.
I can see it.
Okay.
That looks good.
Okay. So page 2 is just the additional or change in FTEs for over the last 4 years for waste prevention and environmental services. And you can see it's grown from 121 FTEs to 170, just under 173.
Can I ask a quick question to the Metro staff on this one? What is a traffic control technician? It looks like that was new in 20 with 12 FTE.
Yeah, that is a new position, and this is in part because Metro South is such an old facility. We have had to spend more time to make sure that it's safe and that we can get traffic routed around the facility, because we have a combination of both self-haul, literally mom and pop pickup trucks and trailers moving next to commercial trucks and big construction and demolition trucks. And we've also had to take on more responsibility for checking loads for asbestos per the newer DEQ rules. So that's part of that effort.
Oh, we lost it.
Hold on a second.
One thing I'll note quickly on the previous slide that was showing the 4-year trend of revenues and expenses. So the first two columns from the left were actuals based on audited financials, and then the next columns were based on budget. And so it's a little bit apples and oranges. I'll note, so for like fiscal year 1920, for personal services, the budget was 20.5 million. Our actual was about 18.7. We have a tendency to consistently underspend our budget. So when you, in the budget document where it goes from actuals to budget, it tends to look like a bigger leap than we actually see in practice.
But so Brian, are you then, so your rate study, is it based on the budget or the actuals in practice?
So it's kind of in between. So we use the budget, but we also build in an underspend assumption.
Okay, is I just popped it back up again. Is it still there?
Yep.
I see it.
Okay.
If you just go into slideshow mode, just make it a little bigger.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one is, can you see this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you went back to the wrong one.
No, I'll pull it back up here. All right.
Ah, perfect.
Okay. So the next one is projection of costs, and this is from the rate model. And what I did here is
Hey, Chris, hold on a second. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But when I sent the rate model to Joe, and I believe he was going to forward it, I asked to include a disclaimer. So the future years in the rate model, this is a new tool we're developing. We have not vetted any of those future year numbers. And this is, one staff person's kind of playing with the tool. Okay. There's no validity in this.
Okay. So anyway, but using the assumptions that are built in within the model, and it assumes, when I was looking through it, it assumes a couple things. Your personnel services are looking to increase by some proportion. Same with materials and services, contracted transfer station services, and again, all these are flowing down to the total metro expenses, which are similar to what we saw in slide 1. 87 million, 92 million. The second line, the debt service, is the projected costs that are embedded within the model, assuming that Metro is going to borrow, I think it's 225 million over a two funding cycle. And so what this is saying is over the next to fiscal year 28, there are some assumptions built in to where the costs for Metro are going to go over the next 5 to 7 years. And this is actually similar to what we've heard Metro staff. I think I'm not sure who said this in the past, but they were looking to compare the Portland model to Seattle, where they're King County, where they're tip fee is in excess of 150 a ton, and similar down south in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so when you're looking at the projection of costs over that period, we're probably going to get there pretty soon at this level of spending. That, again, as Brian is saying, there is a disclaimer. This is embedded in the rate model. To what Metro does is really based on council decision and council direction. Roy brought up earlier that the regional system fee only impacts Sherwood, and he is completely correct on that. However, all the tons generated within a city of Sherwood go to Pride Transfer Station. And like Metro, Pride does have a tonnage fee, which is comprised of their transfer station operation, their transport and disposal, But the one thing Metro can do that impacts the rates, the tonnage fee paid by Pride, is to reduce the amount of tons through the door. And we're seeing this in this current, in the upcoming fiscal year. I think you cut tons to Pride by 5.1%, as well as to a couple of the other transfer stations. So the additional increase in the regional system fee impacts Sherwood ratepayers, and then the tonnage fee, the increase or the decrease in allowable tons to the transfer stations impacts their operation. But again, looking at what's projected in the model, and we can see that that tonnage fee or that total fee for Metro going up from 98 a ton, which it's currently at, up to 158 a ton in 2027. And the impact on the ratepayer in that second block is, an increase that regional system fee by increasing 18% over that period of time is going to increase by 126%, and the rate to the ratepayer impact for a 35-gallon customer goes from $1.28 per customer per month up to $2.89. Within the rate model, there's a designation that says new solid waste facilities, and if you look at that block of data over a period of time, the total facility cost is $235 million, and I'm assuming that there's probably more than one transfer station or one facility that's being contemplated. But the overall, yes,
I have to jump in one more time.
Yeah.
So those facility costs are not based on engineers' estimates or estimates from project staff. They're simply high-level planning estimates. And the debt service costs, again, this is a planning tool we haven't vetted. We have not run these through our financial advisor. There's no validity in these numbers.
Now, your financial advisor, is that FCS?
No, our external financial advisors for debt issuance.
Okay.
Folks, this is Craig Dirksen. I apologize. I need to leave the meeting. I have another meeting that begins in a few minutes, and I need to prepare for that. But I was glad to be able to be this part of it, and I'll be chatting with our staff as well to look at where we go from here. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, but within the rate model, all I have right now is Brian's the rate model, and so I'm pulling the information that's in there.
Well, the other thing I would offer here is this whole discussion about future Metro transfer stations. This is really item number 2. I don't think we're ready to go down this road yet. We are committed to modernizing our system here to make it work better and in a more sustainable fashion, or we're going to have to continue to hire more and more people to try to control the traffic in a growing region. So I would suggest we move on to the second item and we talk a little bit about the Cornelius property and what our thinking is. And then if you want to come back and talk about future transfer stations, we're completely open to that. We're not there yet. We think that's still down the road of several couple of years at least.
Okay, I have just one more, Roy, and that's ties in very nicely with your Cornelius transfer station, and the question then has become, again, if a facility is built in Cornelius, in order to pay, and depending on what the cost is, you're still going to require a substantial amount of tons from that facility, and so the assumption is that some of the tons that are currently flowing to either Forest Grove, to a Hillsborough garbage transfer stations reload facility, to some degree maybe TVWR, maybe as far south as Pride, that transfer station will require tons to go through it, and so the overall impact is going to be, to some degree, it's going to be more expensive. Looking back at Metro's 2004 tonnage forecast, right now there's substantial volume allowed under the current transfer system. the big question is, what to do with self-haul in that particular part of the county, in the metropolitan area. And again, a full-blown transfer station may not be the best use of money, considering that the commercial tons are already flowing to 4 or 5 transfer stations already located within the Washington County area. And the last,
by the way, it is important to note that the only true transfer station on the west side, the far west side, not counting WRI or Pride, is Forest Grove. All the others, Hillsborough Landfill, TVWR, and some of the others are dry waste only landfills. They don't take household garbage. They only take construction and demolition type debris. So they're considered limited purpose landfills or limited purpose facilities.
Yeah, there's 3 of them there. Plus, Hillsborough Garbage also does their wet waste. They do the reload there at their facility.
Yeah, there are reloads.
Yeah. Yeah, but in order to bring those tons, Roy, what I would argue is that you need those tons to go through a new transfer station. There's no sense in building a transfer station if you don't have tons going through it. And so that's the question: is what?
If I may, I think because there's a lot of assumptions built into your analysis. I appreciate the different perspective. But there's a lot of assumptions built into this that are decisions of the Metro Council that require a lot of contemplation and thought and community engagement. So while I think it gives, apologies, it's my puppy. While it gives some sense of what could be, there are multiple decision points in these assumptions that need to be discussed with council. So, and none of those conversations have even begun to happen yet.
No, I agree. I agree completely. In fact, I think within your solid waste management plan says you will do a full feasibility study prior to commencing construction.
Absolutely, and the world has also changed. We have seen this unprecedented change, and I would imagine that our council would want to fully examine all the assumptions. And the goals that we have are very high level and aspirational, but they were placed, put together in a different time, in the before times. And so I think I just really want to emphasize, take these things with a grain of salt, because there's so many things that have changed and so many decisions that need to be made by council that are impacted by it.
I appreciate those comments. This is Keith. That we hope that because of of all the changes that fresh eyes are placed on the aspirational goals, to make sure that resources are used wisely, and all impacts are studied and analyzed before, and nothing is done lightly.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So the last slide is again what Brian was talking about earlier about the current fund balances. And again, Metro does have some restricted fund balance closure and pollution remediation. They do have the repair and replacement set aside for regular repair and replacement of equipment and infrastructure at both the transfer stations, the capital fund budget, and then the operating. And so the one question is the rate stabilization fund. And right now you have under 15 million in it. According to the rate model, the minimum fund balance at that current level of spending is 10.2 million. So just looking at this, you do have the capacity within your fund right now to push the rate increase. And I think, Brian, you said you're going to, Metro Council is looking at doing it out to July 1st. And that's it.
All right. Roy, you want to take control and bring up your.
Sure. So one of the things that we are looking at, and the second item on your agenda today, is to talk about potential property purchase in Cornelius for a future solid waste facility. This was a need that was identified by folks in the western part of the region during our development of the regional waste plan back in 2016, 17, 18. This was one of the things that we heard really consistently from people who came to our public meetings of, why does Portland and Oregon City, because we're the newest and the fastest growing part, why do we not have the same level of services in our part of the region? And so we have been particularly focused on trying to think about the provision of more community services that are not currently provided adequately on the west side, and things like convenient and reasonably priced self-haul service. Metro takes in about 400,000 customers a year at its transfer stations. Many of those are coming from Metro, from the west part of the region. Household hazardous waste collection, as I mentioned earlier, there's a need for a permanent collection facility on the west side. There needs to be a more robust recycling center. I know there are little pockets of recycling centers, but I think everybody still misses the Far West Fiber facility in Beaverton, where it was pretty widely used. Also, the food scraps collection, that eventually, as the economy reemerges and we start to require that food scraps not go into the general waste stream, we want to be able to process those and hopefully work with Clean Water Services to be able to deliver that organic material to them to produce more energy and get it out of the waste stream. We have, and this has been our experience on the south side, but also for the last couple of years on the west side, our single biggest obstacle to establishing any new kind of solid waste, recycling, or other operation has been the inability to locate large enough industrially zoned parcels that would be adequate and appropriate for a solid waste operation. Staff has now identified a 12.5-acre parcel in Cornelius, and we've conducted extensive physical and environmental evaluation of it and engaged local elected leaders, community groups, local businesses, and industry about this particular parcel. Staff is still planning to recommend to our council that Metro purchase this property. And even if this property were to be land banked for a number of years, we still think it's a good investment to hold on to. And once we come out of this COVID crisis and the economy starts to emerge, then a lot of these issues related to what type of facility and so on will be engaging with communities and with our own council on. So,
Roy, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Yeah, this is Tim again. So when you look at the availability of recycling stations, and I don't know what's outside the metro area on the Hillsborough side, but I know here in Sherwood, just down the road a few miles, we have a nice facility in Newburgh. I use it all the time for self-haul and stuff like that. Does your modeling take into account that there are options for service for some of these things that are not necessarily within the metro boundaries for some of these communities?
To some degree, mostly in the area of yard debris and organic composting. One of the things that we want to spend more time looking at, of course, one of the big problems is plastics. single-use plastics and styrofoam and things like that. And although we have a facility in Tigard that's able to take styrofoam and turn it back into a liquid material that can be used to remanufacture styrofoam, we don't have a good way to collect it or get it to that facility. So we have a number of those kinds of obstacles that we're looking at in trying to both improve our recycling system, and we're working closely with DEQ and other stakeholders on the modernization of the recycling program statewide. And we're looking at hopefully more of a producer responsibility, where those who produce products are responsible also for the disposal or the recycling of those products, and to be more engaged in paying into a system that helps capture and recover those materials.
Yeah, I would not disagree with you that there's a need for hazardous waste and some of those facilities on the west side. I particularly don't like having to drive all the way to the east side to get that done. But I think where part of our concern comes in is we don't see the need, given all the capacity that's in the existing transfer stations, for additional wet waste over there. Maybe bank the land for future facility as the region grows. But as you do I'm hoping the feasibility study doesn't just look at that, it looks at the whole region, and what our current capacities are, what our needs are, how far can we go, and just, I think, especially given the costs involved here, really focus on what's actually needed, not necessarily some of the aspirational goals that that we all would like to get to at some point.
Sure. No, I think that's a really good comment, and that is one of the things we'll be looking at. The other thing, and I know at least, Joe, you were part of the earlier session with industry this afternoon. One of the things that I pointed out, in my opinion, the Forest Grove Transfer Station is an antiquated and obsolete facility that needs to be replaced with a more modern facility that is able to more responsibly and sustainably take in waste and be able to transfer it to whether it's the 170 miles to the Columbia Ridge landfill in Gilliam County, or to Coffin Butte down in Benton County. They're all in excess of 100 miles of transport, and right now they're only top loading, and so they're very light loads. We would like to see, even if we don't build a transfer station, we will at some point be requiring a major upgrade at Forest Grove. The current facility, is not located in a good place. It's in a neighborhood. It's next to a park and a natural area. And C, it is just not, it only made sense when they could go 30 miles to the south to the Riverbend landfill in Yamhill County, which is no longer an option that's available to them. So I think we all have to work at building a more sustainable solid waste system. Great point.
So then as part of a still to be conducted feasibility study, the potential of enhancements to existing facilities is part of that study.
Correct. And we're actually going to do two things. We're going to be looking individually at these facilities in Cornelius and one in the south part of the region. But we're also going to be looking system-wide at what our needs are more broadly, and take that into a system-wide feasibility study, if you will.
And I have to mention, and this is for Marissa, if you see a major amendment request coming from us for commercial land, just remember the comment that Roy made about how difficult it is to find commercial land in the metro area right now.
Noted.
Had to get that.
We have people that need more industrial land. So not just metro needs more industrial land.
Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan Blue, who has been managing this project on both the Cornelius side and the south side of the region. But we're really here today to talk to you about the Cornelius property specifically. So, Dan?
Thank you, Roy. And I'll share my screen here in just a second. Just by way of introduction, my name is Dan Blue. I'm the system planning manager for Roy's department. I've been with Metro 5 years. And before this, I was the solid waste director for the city of Gresham for 8 years and did a tremendous amount of work with Chris Bell. So I know Chris well. And I was on the other side. I was a local government, and I was the one who got to take all those phone calls from the residents when we had to do rate increases. So I understand your perspective quite well. Before that, I was a research associate at Portland State, running a recycling and waste reduction, waste prevention research unit at PSU. So thanks for having me here. My presentation is one that we have used across the region. I think we've given, and I've participated in, over 30 different presentations over the last probably 8 months. So we refine it as we go. The one that you'll see tonight is exactly what I shared today with the solid waste industry folks and local government representatives. So I apologize, Joe. I think you're going to see exactly the same thing that I went through earlier today. In this presentation, what I'm going to cover is we're going to talk just briefly about the role of Metro in the region's solid waste management system. We're going to show some pictures and give you some ideas of what a modern transfer station looks like and what values and services it might bring to the community. We're going to share a little bit about why Cornelius is a site of interest for this type of development. We're also going to share how we're approaching community engagement during a pandemic. And then I think we've already talked a little bit about next steps. I'm going to cruise through some of the slides because I know time is a little bit short. And I think you all understand our relationship to you in the Metro region. So I'm going to share my screen now. Might take me a sec to get it straightened out, but bear with me. Okay. This one. Boom. Okay. Can you all see the slide, or do you see my notes? Slide. Okay. I can't really see you, so please verbally interrupt me if you need me to stop talking for a sec. Okay. I think you are aware of, who Metro is. Skip through this one. Just want to pause on this one. Councillor Juan Carlos represents the area where we are considering putting a facility in, and he often has introduced this presentation. We've presented to the City of Hillsborough, City of Cornelius multiple times, City of Forest Grove, Washington County Board of Commissioners, and met with staff at all of those agencies over the last 9 months. So we've been pretty busy. So why are we considering this now? Let's see. So leading with equity, health, and the environment, I'm actually going to, hold on one sec, just so I can read and not be distracting. Leading with equity, health, and the environment, the recently adopted Metro 2030 Regional Waste Plan identifies clear goals for maintaining a system, ensuring equitable distribution of and access to services. It also specifically directs staff to evaluate the feasibility of siting a new transfer station on the west side, identifying a potentially suitable site, and ascertaining the likelihood that the host community would welcome such a facility has been our first step in the process, and that's really what we've been working on. We also know that Western Washington County continues to grow, and we are seeing high levels of new housing starts in Hillsborough, Forest Grove, and Cornelius. In response to this growth, it is Metro's responsibility to provide further enhancements and capacity to the public solid waste system. Service equity, rate transparency, and the need for enhanced services on the west side are long overdue. We have been hearing from local governments for many years about these needs, and this is why we launched this project in the fall of 2018. This is more detail than you need, but I just want to point out that Metro South was built in '83, Metro Central in '93. We haven't built anything new since then. And we are, so we're here today. I do want to point out, though, that in '85, '86, Metro had chosen a transfer station site for the western portion of the region. only to not be able to go forward with the development of that site for a number of reasons. So with the passage of the Regional Waste Plan and subsequent guidance from Metro Council, we have begun the process of trying to identify potential property for a future station in Washington County and a new site for some or all services currently provided at Metro South. So I am lucky enough to get to work on both of those projects. So this map is very familiar to you. This shows the private and 2 public transfer stations in the region. So the primary reason I'm here is to share information about a potential new modern transfer station that we are considering locating in the city of Cornelius, and to answer any questions you have. A new modern station would bring much needed and long overdue basic and enhanced services to the western part of the region. And more importantly, we'll create a community asset that provides a benefit to locally owned businesses and residents, as well as those in neighboring communities. This picture is of a future station up in King County called Algona. So when we speak of basic services, what exactly do we mean? This new facility would include public and business self-haul service, so residents can bring trailers of demolition debris or other waste to the facility, which would be compacted and reloaded for transport to final destinations. In addition to the self-haul services, a recycling depot and drop-off component would be included. Also a household hazardous waste facility. We've talked a lot about that tonight. And finally, the station is planned to accept waste generated by residential and commercial routes from any route collection companies operating in the region. In addition to the basic services, expanded community services are now incorporated in the design and construction of newer publicly owned transfer and materials management facilities. A short but not exhaustive list of these enhanced public services includes, but are not limited to, an education or learning center focused on sustainable stewardship as it relates to reuse, recovery, and recycling in the environment. A resale and reuse store focusing on household and other items that have a remaining useful life. A community gathering and workspace, or public parks or other amenities for the host community.
So Dan, you're aware of the incredible pushback in the city of Portland using water ratepayer dollars on community assets, and then they tried to change the charter to make it clear that that was allowed, and it got rejected just this past month.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't you anticipate, as I'm giving you pushback right now, others pushback to build community amenities in a center?
Yeah, I think I'll defer that question to Roy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a point of discussion. We can certainly share more about the regional system fee, which will probably be the source of funding for these, as long as it's solid waste related. There does not appear to be any issue with use of those funds, but then the question becomes which of those amenities or which of those, some of those are very directly related to solid waste. I mean,
Yep,
reuse
absolutely.
and repair.
Yep, absolutely. I agree.
So,
and one point, I use the word parks, and you're going to see a picture of Seattle North facility that built a additional space for the community to gather in case there was an emergency. And in all honesty, it looks very much like a park, and I don't think we would follow that same path that Seattle took on that particular park, that particular amenity that the community wanted. So I appreciate that question.
So appearances are important.
Yep, absolutely, I agree.
Because it is low-hanging fruit for critics to.
Yep.
I think part of what you're feeling here in terms of our comments around this is is a couple things. You know, when we see and I heard you when you said it was just a kind of a placeholder number of 235 million total, when there's other facilities being built in the $20 million range, $19 million range, it does it causes a lot of concern on our side about what's actually being built. How big is it going to be? Is it going to have a huge recreation center attached to it? Because to Keith's point, those are kind of two separate amenities that we're talking about. And in terms of working with the public and understanding what they want, there's kind of two paths that you have to go down. And I think it's really important that we're really careful about that. And I'm not sure the ratepayers throughout the entire region want to pay for those extra amenities in Cornelius, as great as they might be, right? So,
yeah, I appreciate that. And that's really great. I'll talk a little bit about our community engagement work and our leading with equity, and in a few more slides. So I do appreciate that comment. So you probably can't see my screen right now, correct?
No, we can see it.
Okay, great. I will keep going then.
We see it with your notes.
Oh, great. Let me swap if I can find it. All right. Interesting.
Technology is your friend sometimes. And
I added 2 more screens so I can shuffle things around a little bit. What do you see now?
I blame it all on Microsoft Teams.
Can you see my slides now?
That looks right.
Okay, thank you. So I will keep moving through. Some of the other potential improvements could include work around greenhouse gas reduction efforts, many of which will focus on transportation methods that mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, flexible space for future operations. Today's design standards for this type of facility will allow for operational flexibility. This approach supports a design that is nimble and responsive to changing markets and material collection methods. Disaster debris staging, operations management, and resilience. So, if we happen to have that terrible earthquake that is predicted, we might be in better position to get the system back up and running. And let's see, renewable natural gas is another thing that, could be incorporated, as well as electrification, particularly of rolling stock at the facility itself. These are all possibilities. This is not a list of things that we intend to include necessarily. It's something that we share with a variety of audiences to know what's possible. So I'll switch gears a little bit. So what does a state-of-the-art transfer, recycling, and materials management facility look like? It could look like a lot of things. Last year, Metro staff had the opportunity to travel to Seattle, and we're fortunate to visit 3 of the newer King County facilities and both of the Seattle Public Utility facilities. I also went to the Tacoma facility as well. I'll just show you a few slides here. This is Factoria Transfer Station, completed in 2016. And this is located in Bellevue, Washington, a town on the eastern edge of Seattle. It includes an 80,000 square foot main transfer building built to LEED Gold standards and is a full service transfer.
I love to interrupt. So
sure, go for it.
True story.
Please do not waste community dollars getting a LEED certification.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate it.
If you do, I'll call you out on how much money you spend on that certification, because it'll be a bunch of money.
Okay.
For just a label that isn't needed.
Okay. So the Factoria Transfer Station also boasts a number of unique features, including color-coded wayfinding system, community art, a rainwater harvesting system, and daylighting throughout the facility. This is the King County Shoreline Transfer Station, which was completed in 2008. It's located on 13 acres, about the size of the acreage that we're looking at in Cornelius. It's bordered by I-5 to the east and a residential neighborhood just to the west. In an attempt to mitigate impacts to the residential neighborhood, there is a natural creek system that acts as a buffer between the transfer station and the residential neighborhood. This one also is built to LEED, this one to LEED Platinum standards. And some of the sustainable features of this station include rainwater harvesting, solar roof panels, and daylighting as well throughout the facility.
Hey, Dan.
Yes, sir.
Are you able to say how much it cost to build those last 2 facilities?
Yeah, Roy, I'm sorry. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but maybe Chris does.
Yes, I do. And interestingly enough, the Factorial transfer station price was so extremely high because when they built that, they kept the other transfer station functioning. So they had in tandem 2 transfer stations being utilized on the same footprint until they tore down the other one. So that's why that one's a lot more expensive.
They also had to do this incredible shoring up on the right-hand side of the picture here, because the old facility was up the hill from this new one that they built down below.
Correct. So there was a lot of, and this one was very expensive because of the situation. Shoreline, I'm not fully aware of the price. I know that my colleague Doug Drennan is very, very well aware of this, and he can tell. He's told me every price of every transfer station built within the Pacific Northwest over the last 20 years. So
yeah, and I think Chris, I think this one was in the 80 range. If that's the number that's in my head, but I don't have it written down next to me.
Correct.
I apologize for that.
80,000? No, 80 million.
80 million.
80 million. I guess the one thing that's going to distinguish between, you've got a pretty clean piece of land in Cornelius. We're looking at building a similar transfer station in Clark County. We're doing a study right now, and we're under 30 million. The Mid-Valley Haulers just redid their transfer station down in Salem, and they're looking at an all-in price of 18 million with land.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
appreciate that. So the next one, this one really had quite a price tag on it. I do have the number for this one. So this is a truly unique transfer station in the Seattle Public Utilities system, Seattle North Transfer Station. This was built also on an existing transfer station site and was completed in 2016. This is a LEED Platinum design in a 72,000 square foot building footprint. Site improvement and construction costs totaled nearly $108 million and included a number of neighborhood amenities. Wow. What's truly unique about this station is that it is embedded in the Wallingford neighborhood, which, if you're unfamiliar with the Seattle neighborhood, it's a prosperous community where average income is pretty high. Let me switch to the next one.
Did you tour any stations or facilities that weren't embedded in residential areas?
Yeah, we did. We went to South Seattle, and we also went to Tacoma. And Tacoma was great because they were on 120 acres of land. So they had quite a big footprint to build on. So we saw a big mix of very urban residential. And if you see this photo here, you can barely see the transfer station, and I'm looking at this from this vantage point from the corner of the transfer station lot. So the purpose of this photo is to show you that it is really embedded in a mixed-use neighborhood with cafes and restaurants and coffee shops and businesses literally next door. And this certainly contributed to the cost of this facility.
Yeah, and I think that's great if you have no choice. I know Seattle has very limited land with be up there to do stuff like that. But if you can locate in a more rural area, so you don't have to spend the tens to $20 million to make it blend in with the community like that, I would highly encourage that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely one of the drivers for us. Is land availability. Like Roy said, it's really tough. And I'm going to share some slides about the land search process. I like this picture a lot because it shows you a good view of the inside of what a new facility looks like. It also obviously is a viewing room. And this is a fantastic learning environment for the community. It being in the middle of a residential neighborhood, people show up to this little education and viewing room on a daily basis with their kids. They love it. Literally, kids say, "Take me to the transfer station, Mom," and they do it on a daily basis.
Oh,
so
kids love garbage trucks. And I cannot imagine they would not love seeing front loaders moving garbage around.
Eventually they get old enough where when you ask them to take the garbage out, all of a sudden they don't like them anymore. So
I hear you.
They like to see things crunched.
That's right.
So switching gears a little bit, I just wanted to show you some of those photos because, those are some of our examples from the Pacific Northwest that have been built recently. And if you look at what's contained in the Regional Waste Plan, which our council adopted in January of 2019, there are a lot of services that the region's residents and businesses want to see. And that's kind of driving why we went to Seattle King County, because if you look at the Regional Waste Plan and the goals and objectives, in order to accomplish a lot of those, it kind of looks like some of the things that they've built up there. So switching gears, why Cornelius? In late 2018, with the help of a commercial and industrial properties consultant, we were tasked with finding suitable property for which to potentially develop a transfer station in the western portion of the metro region. This work was initiated in part due to initial takeaways from the regional waste plan and from frequent and consistent concerns raised by some Washington County stakeholders around lack of services, lack of rate equity, and lack of rate equity on the west side. So we took a scan of all available properties that met some basic criteria, including size, proximity to transportation corridors, and industrially zoned lands. Staff and the consultant continued to review all available properties as well as investigate additional properties that were not on the market at that time.
So, hey, Dan, can I ask you a question? I apologize. Sure. So I'm a big believer in DEI, but I'm trying to understand in the context of garbage or wet waste, when you say rate equity, could you talk a little bit about what that kind of means at a practical level as you look at this?
I can give an example, but I might ask Roy to go first. And yeah, I'll let Roy take a stab at that first, and then I can add to it.
Yeah, just to be honest about it, some of the transfer stations, one in Forest Grove, one in Troutdale, charge considerably more per ton than metro stations and most of the other private stations do. At times, $15 to $18 more per ton.
Roy, can I give my example as a self-hauler to a Forest Grove facility?
Yeah, I'm speaking just to the commercial.
Okay.
Yeah, it's even more dire when you think about the self-haul. Metros charges $27, $28 for a minimum load, that if that same load were to show up at Tualatin Valley Waste Recovery or the Hillsborough landfill, they could be charged anywhere from $70 to over $100 per load.
When you say a load, what do you mean a load?
Just a small mom and pop load.
Like a pickup truck or a trailer?
Pickup truck with a trailer.
So just as an example, Waste Management in Newburgh charges $18 to take a pickup load in.
Now that's in Newburgh. That's outside of the region, and it's illegal to take waste there from the region.
to take a trailer to the Forest Grove transfer station.
You're admitting it in a meeting.
But I'm just trying to understand the rate equity issue, because I would just put out there's other ways to solve that problem than building a station, right? In terms of with Metro's authority and finding ways to manage that with those haulers.
Yeah. So noted. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, so let's see, where am I? So we then, after we identified these properties that you can see on your screen, we met with the City of Hillsborough, and most of those properties in the upper right corner are too close to the Hillsborough Airport, and there's FAA guidelines that restrict our ability to place a transfer station within, I think, 4 miles of the airport. Secondly, Hillsborough has designated most of those parcels for high-tech development. Think Silicon Wafer, Intel, other high-tech companies are going into that space. So we also looked at a property that was quite a bit outside the metro region. That's the one in the upper left corner. And we were directed to stay within metro boundaries. We looked at a site south of Hillsborough, and that one hasn't worked out. So we did focus our look at Cornelius, and we actually looked at 3 available parcels. And we reached out to the city of Cornelius and had a number of meetings with them. And they actually directed us to this particular site that I'll show you here in the next slide, I think.
Hey, Dan, I'm just curious. On the FAA restrictions, obviously that's because of birds and air traffic. But with the facilities you guys are proposing, they're enclosed.
Yeah, so it's still classified as a transfer station and requires a DEQ permit as such. And correct me if I'm wrong, Roy, but we were not going to be able to site at any of those properties.
Correct. The FAA currently doesn't make a distinction between a facility that's completely indoors and one that's outdoors.
Well, Yes. Well, as a former helicopter pilot, I appreciate that. I've had more than enough close calls with birds. So,
thank you for that question. Okay, so this narrows us in a little bit. This is shows you Cornelius and then Forest Grove to the left. The big blue dot is the location of the property. It is just north of the Walmart in Cornelius, and you can see the property itself by the dotted line in the picture on the right. And we're going to zoom in a little bit more. So I showed this slide. This is an aerial view. Obviously, the property that we're interested in is highlighted in green. It is at North 4th Avenue and Holiday Street in Cornelius. We show some of the nearby businesses because we realized when we started looking at the property that there was potential synergies in this industrial zone for synergies between a transfer station and, for example, Myers Container, which is the big building across the street, which has a recycling arm. They manufacture metal drums, which we actually purchase some of the drums from them for use in our household hazardous waste facilities. Summit Energy is labeled C. They're just below the property. They manufacture a jet fuel from food waste. D is a truss company. They manufacture engineered trusses. And then A is a composting facility, S&H Compost and Landscape. And then there are a couple of food generating businesses, Higher Taste Foods, and then New Season Foods. It's not New Seasons, but New Season Foods, which is in the bottom left corner. The western edge or the left edge of the parcel itself is the Forest Grove Cornelius city boundaries. So I just want to show that to you. It gives you a little more of a sense of where we're talking about. I do want to point out Holiday has been improved in that winding stretch of the road here. So that is a freight, that can support large trucks. This was a major distribution center for a lot of large trucks coming in and out. This is 10th Avenue in Cornelius to the right. A little closer zoom. This is the parcel again. As you can see, it's agriculturally used and has been so for many, many, many years. As far back, I don't think there was ever any major development on it. Any developer of this property is going to be required to extend Holiday Street, which is shown here, across the northern boundary of the property to connect it into Forest Grove's industrial zone, which is right over here to the left. So this is a cost we know that we're going to incur should we buy the property. There is a memorandum of agreement between Cornelius and Forest Grove, and road improvements in this area are in both of their transportation master plans. Let's see, the other thing I wanted to say is that over the last year, we have done a comprehensive property investigation, including Environmental 1, Environmental 2 assessments, an ALTA survey. We've done property appraisals. There used to be a wetland in the bottom, the southwest corner of the property of about an acre. And through our investigation work, we've actually improved the value of this property by finding out that that wetland no longer exists on the site. And that adds an acre of usable industrial land to the property, and also allows us to avoid having to bank wetland elsewhere off-site should we develop it. We've also done a comprehensive geotechnical investigation, and we're still working on community engagement. That's why we're in front of you tonight. Just a couple of pictures. This is from our environmental assessment work, drilling holes, smelling dirt, sending it to the lab. And then this are a couple photos of our geotechnical investigation. Sorry, it says scheduled for July 20th. I didn't catch that update, so we'll fix that. It's all done now. So some of the benefits, and we've kind of talked about this, I'll cruise through this. Environmental health, jobs, and investment. We definitely see an opportunity to work with the local communities to do job development and training. Community partnerships and amenities. We may not need a restore because Habitat Restore is just down the street and we could partner with them, for example. We certainly are looking at cultural and social and racial equity issues and service equity, which we talked about. Historically, transfer stations have been dumped onto communities because that's where the cheapest land is. We're absolutely not going to take that approach. We want to work with communities to make sure that this is a good fit for their community. And that's why you're seeing some of those amenities being discussed. So we really think it's important for the citizens of Cornelius to understand how we are approaching the community considerations of a new facility and how we as a public agency recognize the need to mitigate as many of those community impacts as possible. These photos are actually from the Cornelius Town Center planning process from a few years ago. And we had actually planned to follow their successful approach for doing planning. And then, let me see. Metro, we are committed to work closely with and for the members of the community to first decide whether or not this is a facility desired by the community, and if so, how such a facility should be designed to look, feel, and perform as an asset to their community. So we're committed to co-create any new facility with the host community and nearby residents and businesses. As you may know, Cornelius is 52% Latinx, and it's a relatively low-income community. Given the history of solid waste facility siting, it has been particularly important for us to make sure that those most marginalized members of the community, those who could most be impacted by siting of a facility, have their voices elevated in the decision-making process. So we had planned to do what Cornelius did with their town center, but then COVID happened. So I am happy to say that despite the challenges of a global pandemic, with lockdown orders and all of our team having to work from home, we were able to craft and deploy an effective virtual engagement strategy. We had great help from our partner organization, Centro Cultural. They are our partner on this engagement work. Centro and the city of Cornelius itself have been incredibly important partners in this work and have helped us solicit honest and valuable feedback from stakeholders in the community. So we have put together an advisory group, and I'll talk about that in a sec. We've held a couple of public webinars. We've done neighbor forums, and we'll be doing another one of those next week. We've held meetings and forums with local businesses. We held the industry roundtable earlier today. We did roll out a community survey, and I'll share a couple slides from that. And then, as I said, we've been in front of all the West Side governments. Is there a question?
Oh, I've done your survey. I hated it.
Great. Thank you for doing it, and I'm sorry you didn't like it. Okay, so this is a little bit about our community advisory group. So this is made up of 12 members of Cornelius, Forest Grove, and Hillsborough. This amazing group of residents met 7 times to learn about the project, the history of environmental justice movement, about potential for odors, noise, vectors, traffic impacts, etc., and ways that modern stations can help to mitigate those concerns. At this early phase, we were most interested in learning about potential impacts to the community based on their proximity to the site. In future phases, we'll broaden our reach to ensure that all who may be impacted or can benefit from this facility can weigh in.
So Dan, your
Yes.
Your committee member on the lower left-hand side doesn't look too happy.
I know, right? That's how my kids look sometimes right now because they do not get to go to school and they're very frustrated.
So I have a quick question about your community. Sure. I think the community engagement you've done in Cornelius is great. And I think what you did with this community is great. Typically, when we do community engagement for a project, there's 2 sides to that coin, right? There's the side that says, here's what you're going to get. Here's what we're proposing. What do you think? Do you have ideas? Do you have thoughts in terms of the service, feature, building, whatever? Mm-hmm. The other side of it that we do in our community is here's how much it's going to cost. Here's how much you're going to pay for it. And I think what makes this project unique in that respect is the ratepayers to the whole region are going to pay for this, right? So how are you engaging the ratepayers in terms of getting their assessment of the value of this project, and are they willing to help fund this project? And I know that's a much steeper hill to climb up because someone living in East Portland's probably never going to see that facility, right? So
yeah, no, that's a great question, and I to be perfectly honest, I think we're just scratching the surface of assessing ratepayers, willingness to support infrastructure investments. And Roy mentioned that we'll be starting more of a master facility comprehensive planning process to assess the needs of the entire region, not just the west side. So this what I'm presenting on and the engagement work that we've done to date has really been focused on, does this particular parcel and the potential impacts of this location, this parcel, have on neighboring communities? Is it something that we can even advance forward? And we really wanted to have their feedback before council made a decision to acquire the property or not. Should we, benefit from having a property, then we have to do a much broader, much deeper dive on engagement work to talk about those costs. And if we do this, this, and this, or provide this and this and this service, what is that going to do to tip fees? What is it going to do to the rates at the curb? Yeah, absolutely. So we are just scratching the surface. I feel pretty good about what we've been able to do during a time of COVID. And so, yeah, but I hear you.
Well, it's always good to bank land. I mean, you can always sell it if the project falls through, and as long as you get a good deal on the land to begin with. I would just add, though, I think we want to be really careful about perception challenges right now. So in the midst of a pandemic, if we're raising rates and buying land at the same time, how does that look to the public? Right.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's one of the comments that you, go ahead, sir.
That's a timing issue, but
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, one of the comments, we did a virtual sticky note exercise, and one of the comments from the community advisory group members was, we asked them what their concerns are. And it said that that person said there might be people opposed to this that don't know all the facts, and getting the word out is important to tell people where we are going. And certainly that's going to include costs and rate impacts going forward. Another person said, making sure that the location was selected on specific criteria, not just because of cheap land. People should know that a thoughtful process was used. Then we asked them, at this stage, having learned everything about the project to date, would you support it? And the entire community advisory group is in that far left column with yeses. So I just wanted to share some of those. Mm-hmm. The survey you mentioned, thank you for that. We had over 800 respondents. Half of them were from the cities of Forest Grove, Cornelius, and Hillsborough. And this one was, how likely are you to use such a facility? And pretty positive response to that. Up at the top, very likely. And then the lower three, if you can't read those, are I'm not sure in the middle, not very likely towards the bottom, and then unlikely at the very bottom.
My only critique on your survey, that it didn't discuss costs or how it was going to be paid for, and a lot of, you might find that when you start putting those things in, your answers change.
Oh, I would absolutely expect that. Yeah, one of the things I got to do at Portland State was a lot of research and doing survey work. And yeah, definitely putting in those qualifiers will change these results. So, and this is just a snapshot. We just literally got these results in a couple of days ago. So I'm just sharing a couple with you to be kind of representative of the survey. And we will have a full survey report with all the data and all the findings available to everybody and posted on our webpage in the near future.
Yeah, but Dan, the survey, the value is for me, falls a little bit along Tim's lines, is minimal because the other elements aren't as part of that survey yet. Different cost potential. It's one thing if you're able to build a great facility for 20 or 25 million that meets all of your needs for 50 years, or 108 million. Big,
and I think we will absolutely
big difference. And then part of the whole the true need to demonstrate an actual need. I mean, if Forest Grove's facility is gouging the self haulers, that needs to be fixed one way or the other. But what are the true needs of that facility in the near term and then potentially long term?
I appreciate that.
And facility study, the fact, as part of this survey, talking about costs, talking about the need of still doing a facility study, the impression that people get, or at least, granted, I get when I took the survey, was this is getting built, this is going to be this huge thing, it's going to have all of this stuff, and then it may be some of these other things. when per your statements and Roy's statements is there's no assurity that anything is going to be done because you haven't even done a facility study.
Yeah, thank you. We've been transparent with everyone that we're at phase one, which is to potentially acquire a piece of property. And then there would be much more engagement. And like you said, I really appreciate those suggestions to include costs and different scenarios and what buys what, so people have more of a menu of choices in terms of what they would support versus what they wouldn't. At this phase, we're really trying to just see if people would support this kind of facility at that site. And there was no way to talk about what could be at that site without sharing some of the opportunities and possibilities. And again, we're trying to reflect in sort of the menu of things that you could put on there based on feedback from that comprehensive planning process that resulted in the regional waste plan, which drove us to look for property on the west side. So we are, in my eyes, being responsive to community drivers on this one all the way through on this. So I do appreciate that. That's great feedback. And the next round of surveys will definitely include, if we get to that point, we'll definitely include more on sort of the cost benefit business case stuff.
Roy, did you guys get an option on the dirt before you did your investigations and actually improved the value of the dirt?
Well, we did sign a purchase and sales agreement. Yes.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, that was the only way that we could get on the property to actually do the site investigation work.
Yeah, you don't want to improve the property before you buy it. That's never
right. So I think this is almost my last slide. I appreciate you hanging in here with me. This was our original time frame. We obviously, with COVID, it's changed a lot, and we don't know when we're going to come back out. We had a lot of conversation about that tonight already. Community engagement, we've talked a lot about in the last few minutes, would continue throughout any project should we decide to go forward. I just want to make sure everyone is super clear. We do not have approval yet from council to acquire this property. We are under a contract, and that comes up early next year, so we will be taking this decision to Metro Council. This is not a decision to design, and this is not a decision to build, simply a decision to acquire the property. One of the benefits from a lot of the transfer stations that I showed you and that I know other examples, including, and thank you for sending me Chris's report on the Sandy City one, by the way. Those were places that had public lands already available to them, or through some process they could utilize public lands. It is really hard to find property, as you know. We've been looking in Clackamas area, for example, for 10 years, and there's just simply no properties on the market for sale that meet the kind of basic criteria that we need. So anyway, this was our original kind of time frame that we were thinking about, but obviously this is all up in the air at this point.
Right. Since it doesn't list the facility study, you need to do a study before you do a design, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean,
and I would add not just a facility study, a feasibility, a regional feasibility study on it. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I would highly encourage you to consider setting up maybe a parallel committee with cities and haulers represented to get together and talk about it. And, because this, as we've talked about before, this has potential rate impacts beyond just the regional service fees for our haulers and for our communities all across the metro region. And I think you get a bunch of smart people in a room, we can come up with a lot of smart ideas about how to maybe mitigate some of that and really think, I keep saying the word smart, but think smartly about how we solve some of the challenges that we have in terms of that you guys talked about. I'll stop rambling.
Thank you. That's a great comment. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll just reinforce, before we get to that design stage on this particular property or this particular facility, we're going to take a pause and do the regional global look at needs and facilities and gaps in the system. And that, I know we're going to take a pause because Dan is also going to be in charge of that particular effort. And so we've been talking about how that's going to get kicked off and get started.
Thanks for that, Roy. And I apologize, my screen it froze up, so my PowerPoint ended, but my only slide was my next slide, which was thank you. And do you have any questions? And then we had a question for you is how would you like to stay engaged in this process? And also an opportunity for you to sign up for regular project updates at a website, which is, oh gosh, I'm going to blank. We'll have to send you out the slide deck after the presentation.
Yeah, Dan, if you could do that, I think you'll get at least a few people to sign up to get the regular updates and circle back to know when you're doing these different steps and if you develop a committee, a parallel committee, as Tim's hinted at, to help get smart people in the room to look at the system holistically, that's great. I don't know what I'm talking about with garbage, so I'm not a good person. I can just.
Well, and just to expand on that idea a little bit, sorry, Keith. When I say come up with different ideas, I mean, we've mainly been talking about one solution is building a transfer station, right? I think getting that committee together as you're doing the feasibility study is you get a lot of people are in the weeds doing this every day out in those communities to talk about, are there other solutions that we can start picking off some of these problems? Like, for instance, if we have one hauler that's gouging people, there's easy ways to solve that, just through a metro ordinance, right? So I'm just saying there's a lot of, there may be other ways, maybe not solve the whole thing, but significantly reduce the size and scope of what you need to do by doing some other things within the region. And I think a group with haulers and cities represented, I think you can get a lot of great ideas around that.
Appreciate that.
Joe's looking tired.
I think he was. Were you snoozing, Joe?
No, I was just listening.
Joe had to sit through me twice today, so I apologize, Joe.
That's okay. As long as you don't make me give the presentation next time. So
okay, we'll see.
I appreciate you guys coming and making lots of good decisions with pausing and reflecting, and those are all great words and actions that you've done and you're planning to do, just to do things for the betterment of the region in this category of service. I've been saying a lot of things. Tim's been saying a lot of things. Councilors, other comments or questions?
I think you and Tim covered it all.
Yeah, I would just echo what the mayor says. Thank you for coming to the meeting tonight and speaking with us. It's always good to have this type of communication. There were a lot of questions as to, at least in my mind, about this transfer station and kind of what the purpose was and everything. So it was very helpful to hear it from the horse's mouth. So thank you.
Come on, Doug. I know you got a question or a comment. Did we lose Doug?
He's muted.
He's
muted.
You might have sat through the presentation earlier today too and had enough with me.
Well, I want to second or third what everyone just said. I really appreciate you guys coming to the meeting. I know there was a barrage of questions coming at you on this, and we're trying to understand what you guys are up to. Generally, this is a really fun group, I promise. So, but I do appreciate you guys coming out and taking the questions and helping us understand this and your willingness to work with this going forward. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, we as frontline folks dealing with the complaints, with our water rates, sewer rates, storm rates, any fees. We get to the point in our community we even have a charter amendment limiting
building sign.
So it's sensitive. We get, the cities get the brunt of it. You guys might see some of it, but cities get the bulk of it. Because they don't recognize that there is a thing called Metro.
I don't know what it is.
This mystery thing downtown that most people don't know exists. So thank you very much, each and every one of you.
Thanks for having us.
Very much appreciate the invitation, yes. and I really do. We are in it together, and if there's on this subject or anything in the future, if you ever have questions or it's not adding up, We're happy to come and chat with you. We're happy to come, show our math. And it really is helpful to us to have that outside perspective about, how our messages are working or not working, how our, proposals are working or not working for folks. And I think in the end, we're going to have a stronger decision because of your input. And I just really appreciate you for being upfront with us and also giving us the chance to come and share with you and investing quite almost 3 hours in our world.
Didn't realize it'd been that long. Wow.
Well, it's so exciting, the topic. It just flies by.
Correct. Garbage is a lot of fun. You'll learn to enjoy it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks.